to the Tuesday, December 10, 2019 Shelburne Selectboard meeting, which I now call to order. The next item is to approve the agenda.
So moved.
Mary moves to do so. Jamie seconds. Any discussion? Hearing none. Those approving, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
And those opposed, nay. We will miss Colleen, who will not be present this evening. The next item is to approve the meeting minutes of November 26, 2019, our most recent meeting. Ahead of discussion, I've got two comments to make, Lee. One is on page 1, number 6. The references to Flore, F-L-O-R-E, I think, Sergeant.
Thank you.
An editorial, yes. And on page, got it?
Yep.
Then on page 413, there's a typo recognized next to the last sentence. With those editorial corrections, is there any other discussion?
None.
Hearing none.
Move to approve.
Mary moves to approve.
I'll second.
Mike seconds. Jamie won't be voting for reason of not having been present for the meeting. Those approving, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye, the three of us do. Thank you very much. The next item are public comments. Hearing none, seeing no hands. The next item, thank you, is our select board comments. Mike?
I don't have any this evening, thank you.
Mary?
Just that it was really nice to pull in tonight and see the town hall and the library all lit up and in full use. For a second, I thought maybe we were meeting over there. And then I thought it would be nice if we were meeting over there. So just planting a seed.
Thank you. Jamie?
I would like to thank the Parks and Rec Committee and the entire town staff for the tree lighting event. It went off really smoothly, as always. They put a lot of time and effort into preparing for that, so it was a great turnout. It was just a picturesque evening for that event with the snow falling, and bravo all around.
Thank you. It seems we're always complimenting Rec, but gee, they just do a marvelous job, and in this case, a lot of local businesses played supporting roles, and we thank them certainly for that. We may not meet once again before the end of the year, in which case I'd just like to comment, I'm sure on our behalf, that we would wish everyone has reason to enjoy the spirit of the holidays coming. Lee, next item is yours. Select Town Manager report.
Thank you. Yes, I'd like to thank everybody involved as well. And of course, when you start naming a few, you inevitably leave out a few. The library staff were a great help in that evening, the businesses in the area who helped out a lot. And of course, Peter Frankenberg, who's our hidden secret weapon, the guy in the basement of the old library who actually flips the switch to turn on the tree lights every year. Hey. So
Keep that a secret, right?
town's secret weapon. Just a few other quick notes. The solar panel installation on the library has begun, and we're hoping that will continue over the next few weeks and be done before Christmas. So that's well underway at this time. Went to a very interesting workshop yesterday on first responder wellness. It's the first time the state hosted an event of that nature, really focused on helping those who help us. Police, fire, rescue, dispatchers, corrections, all those folks who are on the front lines or sometimes on the back lines of things. And there's been a renewed focus on helping those folks deal with the trauma that many of them witness almost every day. So we'll be working on that here. You know, we've had a clinician on retainer for the police department and available to the other first response agencies, and we're proposing to continue that in the next budget year. Tomorrow, I think everyone knows, we'll have our all-day budget review meeting with department heads and committees, boards, and commissions starting at 9 a.m. And we'll be going through the day with that annual process and then doing the hard work on the budget from there. And also wanted to mention that the Historical Society is having their grand opening of their space in the basement of the historic town hall. That's Saturday morning with a ribbon cutting at 11:30. I'm sure they'd love it if members of the community were there to participate in that. That's
Thank you, Lee.
that's enough. Thank you.
Any questions of Lee? Any comments? Hearing none. The next item is our legislative update from Jessica and Kate, both of whom are here. You want to present yourselves in whatever order you wish? Neither of you need any introduction, but it would be helpful.
You know,
If you-
Jessica, if you could grab
you
the
took
mic,
that
you don't
mic-
have to stand, but if you could grab the mic and just hold it so that our viewers can hear. Thank you.
Okay. So I'm Jessica Brumsted, the representative for Shelburne and St. George. I guess it's not the volume, it's just for that.
Right, yeah, yeah.
Okay. And do you want to introduce yourself and then we'll...
Representative Kate Webb from Shelburne.
So we thank you very much for the invitation to come and meet with you all. And also, we had hoped that tonight would be more of a discussion, that we would hear from you a little bit about what you're worried about or what you're excited about in the coming year and what you want to be sure that the two of us keep an eye on, whether or not it's a municipal issue or education or whatever you think. I have some stuff because I've been traveling to all kinds of legislative briefings and then I know what's going on in my committee, and Kate knows all about her committee. So we could start with hearing from you or start with hearing from us, however you want to go.
Why don't you give us your sense of what we can expect in the session in January that starts, and maybe a little bit about recent experience?
Okay.
I will say it's a little bit difficult to give you a broad picture of what's going to happen. We can tell you some of the things that we know about right now, but there are a multitude of bills that will be coming forward that we know nothing about at this point. I think that there are some things that we can tell you about that we know are coming. We can't tell you what's going to happen, such as minimum wage bill, paid family leave bill. We're expecting something around marijuana. I don't know what will happen, because that's tied up in, that's two more committees to go to before anything happens there. And I think those are the ones that we know are probably the most active, and I think that the marijuana probably affects you, and we are really interested in hearing from you about your concerns around that. Otherwise, my background, I'm education. I've been 100% education, whereas previously, when I was majority whip, I knew what was going on everywhere. Now I've become much more hyper-focused in what's happening with education since I'm chairing that committee. So I can talk to you quite a bit about that.
Tell us about what you anticipate as in education, and I think a number of us are probably especially interested in family paid leave, paid family leave.
Was that in your committee?
No, but
No.
I'm happy to talk a little bit about it. So why don't you do the education and then I'll go through what I have prepared. Is that okay?
Sure.
Okay, let's do that.
Sure. I currently chair the Education Committee, so I've been spending much of the summer and fall preparing for that. We have a couple of major bills that are probably in many ways bigger than what Act 46 was in terms of impact on children, and that is Act 173, which was our bill designed to address the needs of children that need additional support, otherwise known as a special ed bill. It's undergoing some fairly significant changes related to funding. The purpose of that law was to use our money more wisely in a way that isn't just counting beans. Right now, what our educators need to go through is an incredible accounting system in order to be reimbursed. We would be moving instead to a census-based model. It's complex, and it will result in changes, the changes. In addition, there is a rulemaking process going on right now, and that has that will be in the State Board of Education. In the meantime, there's been a move to sunset the State Board of Education.
Yeah.
So we're dealing with a lot of complex issues in that regard. And the one that I'm working on right now is also our Act 166, which is the pre-K bill. We have universal pre-K in the state of Vermont. It's for 10 hours. It has some growing pains. We had a recent report on that was done by an outside organization. We've gotten the report. The report probably raised more questions. As a result, I have been organizing tours around the state looking at pre-K programs. So I've been in the southern part of the state. I've been in Brattleboro and Bennington and Manchester, and I've been in Middlebury and Orwell, and I was just recently in Rutland. And tomorrow morning at 7 a.m., I'm heading to Danville, St. Johnsbury in the Northeast Kingdom. And that's to help us understand what it is we need to do, the complex needs of families that are working, the changing face of education, and the changing face of the students that are coming to school. We're dealing with more families that are children that are growing up with toxic stress. It's having a pretty significant impact on our school. It's having a significant impact on children. And so pre-K becomes even more important.
Are these changes, Kate, being generated by assessments of the efficacy or the degree to which this participation or the cost? What concerns you about?
Well, the 10 hours, there aren't that, if you're a working family, 10 hours of pre-K education for a 3, 4, and 5-year-old isn't enough for you to deal with the care that your child needs beyond those 10 hours. So it's great for a stay-at-home parent model, but it's not. What's fascinating is to watch the different ways that school districts and community around the state have been working to expand those hours. And there are a variety of, I've seen at almost every place, they're interpreting how to do it differently. Some offering full day within schools, some working with private providers. So we will be looking at that again this year. It's quite an important, it's not only good for children, but it's good workforce, for family support for those in the workforce. So those are a few of the things I'm thinking about. There are a few others, but.
Will the State Board of Education be a loss?
Where right now my interest is looking at creating a new use for the State Board of Education. For example, right now there's a lot of controversy going on about something called proficiency-based learning and proficiency-based grading. And there's a tremendous amount of misunderstanding about that. So it's not really a good role for the legislature in terms of law to get involved in that, but I'm in conversation with the chair of the State Board of Education that they would actually be a really good forum to get into what are the concerns that people are having, are some of the complaints around higher ed, post-secondary institutions looking at proficiency-based grading, is that accurate? Where do we go from here? So that would be, we're looking at a new use of the State Board since we moved from a department position to a secretary position. I'm sorry, I can get a little in the weeds, and I'm trying not to do that.
Plus, you're going to the Northeast Kingdom. You need every
Yeah.
bit of support we can manage for you.
Yes. Oh, and you'll probably hear something about the Ed Fund as well, where we'll be looking at. There's always thoughts about changing the way that we fund education. I'm going to speak with someone in St. Johnsbury about his view. I'm not expecting any big changes, but education continues to be expensive. We have schools around the state that are looking at multi-million-dollar school infrastructure projects. And 200,000 South Burlington, 200 million. We get our zeros mixed up in the legislature. 200 million in South Burlington, another in Winooski, another 60 million over here, and we no longer have the state aid to school construction that we had in the past. I'm in conversation with our federal delegation about federal funds related to school infrastructure. There are reports across the country that we are not alone with our 1960s school buildings that were out of date. There are 2 bills, one in the House and the Senate in Washington. Those are not moving at this point in time. My last conversation with Leahy's office is that it probably won't happen unless there is a sort of an omnibus infrastructure bill that would tie railroads and transportation and school buildings and hospitals and mental health facilities all together. So.
Mary, got a question or two?
Well, no, is proficiency-based learning the same thing as Common Core curriculum? Is that?
It's a derivative of it.
Somewhat, but not really. I mean, there's some schools. Our Chittenden, not Chittenden South, we're now Champlain Valley, has been pretty involved in it. Many people think it's going incredibly well, that it actually is creating education that feels relevant to students. It's very confusing to parents how that's working. When we have students come into our committee, we're always asking, so tell us about proficiency-based. They seem to be fine, but it's confusing to families, it's confusing to parents. We're not clear on how institutions of higher education are dealing with this, and so we're hoping to get a better understanding there. It's happening across the country. There are states across the country that are using this. I mean, when you think about it, we want people to be proficient.
The reason I ask is there was a rather large article in the Sunday Times about it.
Yes.
I didn't know anything about it until I read it. So.
Yeah, it was not actually a legislative measure to do proficiency-based learning. It came out of the Agency of Education.
Yeah.
We did personalized learning, and they moved it to proficiency-based learning, so that's another reason I'd like to have the state board take a look at that.
I'm a parent of 4 children who went through proficiency-based learning. My oldest didn't, but then from then on you saw it, and it was scary for parents because you leave the A, B, C, D behind, and it's all 1, 2, 3, 4, and no one should get a 4 in their first semester or their first quarter. And that's scary to kids who come from families where everyone got an A right away. You got an A all the way through, and then you applied to places like, Bates and Dartmouth, and that's what helped you get in. And so now you have the kids who are very high end who are saying, wait a minute, what do you mean I have a child with a 3? What is that? How does, And I think that CVU has worked very hard to educate parents, and now it's been, I would say my second would have been 8 years ago, so that he was there. But those first few years were pretty rocky, and still, I've heard from a lot of my friends who have younger children that it's still hard because there are a lot of colleges that still need to be educated on what it's all about, and that how do you compare them to a student who got all A's versus, those numbers. That's hard for some colleges to do. Some are doing it, some not so well. And SATs then become more important, whereas the colleges are trying to say, no, let's back off on SATs being so important. So we haven't really all been at the same table to talk about this. Which way do we want it?
I have 3 students from Dartmouth that are looking into this for me as well. So we use our students when we can.
Okay, what's going on with the statewide district consolidation efforts? I mean, I don't follow it very closely, but every time I look, it's wrapped up in litigation or it's sort of...
Yes, there are a number of lawsuits. None of the districts prevailed on any of those. There's still one remaining that's still in the court, and that has to do, I think it had to do with discrepancy between districts in terms of like Calais, for example.
Yeah.
I think they saw a large tax increase, and East Montpelier had a beautiful new school. And
are the macro trends as expected? Enrollment's down, costs are going up. The performance indicators seem to be slipping when you look at statewide scores.
Right. Statewide scores across the country are not going
But
so well.
Vermont
We're not an
relative
outlier.
to other states is slipping.
Yeah, it's in New England.
Yeah.
I think we would expect us to be doing better. I do have the secretary, I'm meeting with the Secretary of Education on Friday. I'm going to ask him to come in and present that data to us and help to see if we can break down what's happening with that data. In terms of school consolidation, one of the things that does seem to be happening is a lot of schools are finding that if they can close a school, that then they, instead of reducing costs, they find a way to use that money in a different way, and that's usually to provide better education within the districts. We have some very creative solutions. I was down in Whiting, where which is it's part of the Addison Rutland district, and they have taken one school and they've turned it into a pre-K childcare facility. So they have year-round childcare and a pre-K program within that building. So there are some creative uses that are coming forward in using those buildings. I will tell you that our students are getting more expensive in terms of what we're seeing in terms of toxic stress and children growing up with trauma. This is
When you say more expensive per pupil spending is
I'm saying
increasing.
that to have a child come into your classroom who has very poor self-regulation skills is a child that is going to need more support. And more support is probably going to be more people. It's probably going to include mental health. So when I retired in 2013, the description of the change in terms of the number of children that are showing up in school, it used to be, 1 or 2 in a grade as large as ours. Now it can be 1 or 2 in a classroom. We can thank the opioid crisis for some of this in terms of children that are just not growing up in healthy environments. It's a real concern. We're actually looking at the concept of community schools, where the school becomes more of a community center, where you are perhaps providing the dentist and the social worker and the audiologist and the homeschool coordinator.
Beautiful idea.
Yeah, to say that maybe that's a better use for some of our buildings.
On the consolidation piece, it seems like CVSD should be held up as a model. Is that
We
your
are a
sense?
model.
I mean, we really seem to be bearing costs for other districts that aren't following our lead, right? Is
Yeah,
that
well-
oversimplified, or is it?
Well, our district has been working on consolidation for, 50 years.
Right.
Let's put it that way.
So we're just way ahead of.
When I first ran for election, I talked with Barbara Snelling, who was big on building CVU. And when they were talking about how they were going to send all of the kids from Shelburne to Heinsberg to go to high school, the town was up in arms about it. So that was, 50-odd years ago. So somehow we seem to have a pretty good high school. We seem to have survived, going to school with the kids from Heinsberg and Williston and Charlotte and St. George. So we, in a sense, have been working on that consolidation for a long time. We also have the numbers, and when we consolidated, it was just a quick flip. We just had to bring Charlotte in. And once that happened, so we are really a poster child of one that went really, really well. But we also have 4,000 students.
And St. George struggled a little because they had choice to go anywhere in the state and have funding as well, so even to a private school. So that has been a little more difficult, at least in my door-to-door.
Yeah.
Mike, have we got a
No,
question?
I'm good. No, this is all very informative. Thanks.
Well, in the work that we've been starting to do with some urgency in economic development, the concern over a supply of skilled labor comes up again and again and again.
Sure does.
What can you tell us what kind of attention, by whom, in what form is occurring in Montpelier regarding more skilled labor?
Right. Well, we did pass a workforce development bill last year. I cannot remember totally what we did, so I'm sorry I can't remember that. I can say that I've got 4 members of my committee that are looking at the connection between workforce development and our career and tech centers and higher education. I know that there's an interest in picking that up. One of the representatives from Burlington is just gung-ho on this one. we're looking at, we increased the number of, I remember some of it now, internships and apprenticeships.
No?
Did get increased in the Commerce Bill last year. My committee had it for a little while. We sent it over there. But it's an ongoing concern. I'm totally with you on that.
And there's a new bill this time, the Commerce Committee will be working on workforce development. Because one of the things we did last year in my committee, the Human Services Committee, is we looked at workforce development as it pertains to childcare, because our childcare centers weren't able to keep their teachers, their preschool teachers, because they don't have benefits, they don't get paid that much, and we're asking them to meet quality indicators, which means more schooling, and how do you do all those things and still keep those folks? Because what happens is you start helping the childcare providers have the education. Maybe some of the schools like the Charlotte Children's Center was helping with some scholarship dollars and things like that. But then you lose those people to the kindergarten program that's public, because they pay better, they give benefits, all of those things. So we really tried to work on what do we do about increasing access to childcare as well as quality and the cost. And so we had put money in for loan repayment and scholarship programs, as well as dollars into the Child Care Financial Assistance Program, which is what helps people who can't afford those slots, even if you can find them. Unfortunately, the House passed it unanimously, which was pretty incredible for that bill, with just about $10 million in it. But the Senate they threw it into the budget overall without any of the detail, and they stripped out the workforce development components. So it ended up only being about $300,000 for scholarships and $300,000 for loan repayment, and then that got shorted again. I think it ended up being about $400,000 between the two. And so this year, I've been working this summer with my colleagues on the Commerce Committee to say, let's try it from that angle. They always have a big workforce development bill, so let's put childcare in there. Let's try and help our providers at that through a big bill, which often works. So
This came up, this was an issue in the Economic Development Forum. Has there been discussion about incentivizing in some way opening of new childcare facilities, like capital improvement grants?
Well,
or?
one of the things we also had in the bill that didn't make it was that we did have tax credits for businesses to invest in childcare centers so that they could help to open up and have a few more spaces. For example, our I can't think of the name, Accession Childcare Center that's on Route 7, that's Shelburne.
Yep.
Ascension, that's
Ascension.
it. They did get businesses to invest when they went over to that building and helped them to expand their slots and also to open up more rooms for infants. So one of the things that our committee, which is the House Human Services Committee, is going to be working a lot more closely this year with the House Education Committee on childcare, because we have that 10 hours that's provided to the school programs, but they can also help out in the private, but some of the towns are a little bit iffy. And so actually I'm traveling with Kate on Thursday all day in the Northeast Kingdom, both to get a sense of the issues that the Northeast Kingdom is facing, which are even bigger and more severe than the ones that we are in Chittenden County, and also to look at these issues, public-private, because the private people don't want to only end up with the 0 to 3-year-olds, because you have to have less people or less children per provider.
It's more expensive.
So it's a lot more expensive.
Right.
So they use the preschool, the 3 to 5-year-olds, they can have a lot more children per provider, and that helps them to cover the costs that they can't possibly charge for the real little ones. And so we're trying to work on that and talk about that. And then you also have a lot of parents who want a one-stop place. They, early in the morning on the way to work, they want to bring all their kids to one place. And so in Richmond, for example, they've opened up a whole early care center attached to the school. And one of the problems is you don't want your babies going to an institutional type childcare center with no windows and, not low windows so they can see out, and all those things that we've come to believe is the right way to help our babies. And so that means, building, and infrastructure is not easy. How do you, as Kate said, we heard this weekend from Congressman Welch, who told us that they've passed a great infrastructure bill, but it's stuck waiting for the Senate to pick it up. So anyhow, the issues are.
Right.
So it's a great use of our public schools with declining enrollment.
Sure, yeah, absolutely.
This is.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a reuse. It seems
Absolutely.
overly simplistic, but
Absolutely, it's a great use,
Yeah.
and I'm seeing that around the state. There's some incredibly creative
Yeah.
solutions that I'm watching.
As well as ways to think about how do we help our childcare providers to be able to provide benefits? I mean, is there a way to group them all together and somehow maybe just like school bus drivers are able to get their benefits through the school programs? Is there any way we could help out the early childhood
has
people
anyone
as well?
suggested a municipal role?
Some of this can get quite
Yeah.
excuse me, when you're talking education and municipal, it can get very complicated because of the Brigham decision. But in
Yeah.
terms of
Of the
childcare,
childcare
that's
that
different.
we actually talked about that today at the Chittenden County Municipal meeting, not about childcare per se, but about pulling everyone together into a group because numbers get better rates. And so could you take all the municipal workers in Chittenden County, start there, and do something that way? The problem is the federal government has a lot of rules around groupings. And so in Vermont, you can't go to the Chamber of Commerce, for example, anymore and get a health benefit package based on small business or something where everybody is grouped together. So we couldn't do it that way, but we could talk to the insurance company about grouping everyone together and getting the insurance company to offer a product that and then maybe we could loop in childcare providers. Those are the types of things that Let's Grow Kids has been working very hard on. They're looking at what they're calling joint services. What are the things that childcare centers and providers need that we could do together? Could we purchase things like paper towels and diapers all together instead of individually? And could we purchase benefits together? Could we do those sort of things? So maybe there's a way to think about the municipal piece of that as well. That's a great point.
Does anyone listening wish to join in? Do you have any questions, anyone? We wish you,
Well, Jess is
Any-
going to make a.
Yeah.
Do you
Yeah,
want
I
me to
think
tell
you
you?
have-
I have just a few.
Sure, yeah, no,
I can tell you what's going on in our committee and those sort of things. I mean, I think one of the things that Lee and I talked about earlier was sort of how things will go. And the nice part about this second year is that we sort of hit the ground running because we don't have any new members and we already have bills on our walls. Yeah, they're the ones who have been appointed in, but not quite the same as 44. So we're able to start right away on the bills that are already on our walls. And so for the House Human Services Committee, those are things like, I have a bill that I've asked our chair if we can work on right away, and that's to ban all flavored e-cigarettes. Which is huge this year. Vaping is and we are actually also going to do a hearing looking into the e-cigarette, the whole vaping idea, the little, I forget what they call the mechanism that you use, and the heavy metals that are going into our kids' lungs, as well as our adults for that matter. So those are, I'm just trying quickly. The other thing is that the Older Americans Act is being reauthorized this year in Washington. And so our committee is going to be looking at an Older Vermonters Act, which will look at all kinds of different things from Meals on Wheels and all the way to community resilience in a time of climate change. Should we be making sure that we have processes in place in our communities that if there were a big flood, who's making sure that everybody's okay, those sort of things. And all around the country now, there are these community resilience groups that are getting together to work on this. So we've begun to work on that as well, and we'll talk more about that throughout this year. We are working on a toxics bill for pesticides and so forth that are in children's toys and the things that children play with. We have a child.
I can't believe you have to fight for that.
I know.
You just can't.
But you'd be amazed. A child advocate bill that would be for children in the foster program, where children and families often are afraid to bring up their concerns to folks, and this would have an ombudsman who would work with families and kids so they felt like they had a voice in the process. We'll be looking into that. Again, as I said, workforce issues as they relate to childcare. The Reach Up funding is still a very questionable thing. Reach Up is a program that where we try to get single parents who can't quite make it and are getting funding to help with their children, to help them to get back to work. So we do things like childcare, help them with childcare, help them with healthcare, help them with all kinds of things. But then you got to get to a certain point, unfortunately, where you fall off, even though you may only get just a little bit of help. I mean, you might have just gotten a tiny raise, and that drops you off of all those great benefits. And so we've tried over the years to not make that such a cliff, try to make it more of a hill that's a little easier to handle. And so we're continuing to work on that. It's a big issue, as well as nursing home protections. And then there are just some issues that I thought you would be interested in. Tax and regulate. I know everybody is hearing about it. I saw on your agenda that you're going to be talking about signing, it sounds like, a resolution for opt-in, that you're supportive of opt-in. The House version of the tax and regulate bill that did not pass last time they had finally included an opt-in proposal versus the Senate that has an opt-out in theirs. The other night I went to the Attorney General, held a panel discussion downtown in Burlington, and it was on this topic, and they had Massachusetts and Maine there to answer questions about how's it going in their states. And it was very, very interesting about Maine essentially gives all the power to the municipalities on just about everything. Massachusetts does not. They've set up regions that will be the regions where it will be sold, where there can be markets available, where can people grow, and where can people manufacture. So they have like 3 different categories, and then different towns get to do different things. In Vermont, if in the House version, we would have that if you opt in, then you would get a 2% local tax. So that's something that I hadn't even realized till I was at this hearing the other night. So that's some sort of a way to weigh a little bit what you want to do. But then
That's still in the Ways and Means Committee right now, so that's got some work.
All of these things are, this is just, do you put, we want to put 12% of the money into public health and safety, law enforcement training, those sort of things. So, but again, that's only in the House side, not the Senate. There's a lot of work around all of these type things. And so I'll just tell you that from sitting through that hearing, my worries are what happens to medical marijuana. Medical marijuana is a really fast-growing business itself, and last year they lost money after making money for 3 years in a row. And they're afraid because everybody has marijuana in their house now, and they hand it off to whoever, so they don't need, it's a sticky issue because there are some families who are desperate for the exact type that they make in Milton, for example. And so we have to sort of balance how are we careful not to ruin that for those folks. Also, my other worry is healthcare costs. I mean, I worry about how much is this what kind of costs are we going to have in increased healthcare costs due to issues that come up from the ills of marijuana? And then how to enforce what we have now. We need more funds to educate our kids, though, on the ills of marijuana. So that's the other side of the coin, right? And people are already trying to sell in a black market now. So would it be good to put some rails on this, to try and regulate some of it? A business model would demand transparency and legitimacy. It would make our testing robust. I mean, right now, no one knows how much CBC or THC is in each of what they're getting. So if we had tax and regulate, we could really regulate testing and make sure that we know exactly.
Is that being proposed? That was one of the things I was curious about. I didn't see it mentioned in our material. So there is that is in the House version as well. And they're continuing. There's more work to be done in that. It's still in the government operations, and then the money piece of it is in Ways and Means right now. So there's lots of conversation on what they refer to as the Vermont way, which it would be high quality, tested for purity, restorative justice, monies, all of those sort of things. So there's a lot going on there for all of us to watch.
A lot of, I think what the House bill wanted to do was to be able to pull from the black market. To pull from, not set regulations such that it's going to continue to, keep the black market alive, but to create a regulation such that it's making the black market less viable, less useful.
Right. And today was as we said earlier, was the Chittenden County Municipal Group, and I'll just mention about economic development because I know you all are really interested. Senator Michael Sorokin was there at the meeting, and they talked a lot about Act 250 and local permit issues and zoning rules, and he is very hot on this topic. This will be the focus of his committee, which is Senate Economic and Development Committee. He said that he's going to be holding hearings in January, one in South Burlington and a couple others throughout the state. And so he really wants to talk about the Act 250 requirements as they pertain to what towns are doing. He's hearing a lot about should we be exempting a town like Burlington because they already have so many local permitting and zoning rules and regulations. But then he wasn't totally set on that either. And the mayor of Burlington was there and spoke, and actually Lee spoke as well. It was really a great back and forth. So I think it'll be important for us to watch what that committee does. And I will keep an eye on that as well. And let you know. I'll let Lee know when he's holding that hearing. It sounded like maybe January 9th. So. Also, Kate and I are members of the Climate Solutions Caucus, which has been really busy, and we are holding a hearing or a caucus public forum at the Charlotte Senior Center on Monday evening, which is the 16th, and that's at 7 o'clock. So hope that you can come. I mean, we've got a lot going on there, but I won't go into all that because I don't want to hold you up. But the last thing, I guess, that I would say is the Women's Caucus. I'm sure you all heard about the 7 Days article on guarded secrets. It contained, as you know, disturbing allegations about the treatment of women in the facility, the Chittenden County facility. We, in the Women's Caucus, have been talking about the issues in the women's prison for about a year and a half. We have visited the prison twice. We have met with many of the folks who are there. I'm also on the Lund board, and the Lund board also helps with women who are pregnant or have young children. So we've heard many of these horrible stories. Unfortunately, they weren't proven. It was very difficult to get anywhere. I mean, the one big thing we did do this year is we made sure they're getting real milk. We were shocked at our first visit that they had no access to milk. And there were all kinds of reasons for that, but it's finally there. In August, they finally said now they have regular milk. Today, the Women's Legislative Caucus did put out a statement in the media. We released a statement this morning to talk about how we're very concerned about these issues, but we continue to say that what is really important is that we relook at whether or not these women should be in this correctional facility, and to look at models like Norway and North Dakota and even Connecticut now, where there is a campus setting, right, for these folks to be in, so that they can have the opportunity to learn how to go back to work, how to take care of their families, so all of the things. Many of these women are there because they are addicted, and they're just having a hard time getting their life together. And so we try to help them with medical assisted treatment, but you need so much more than that. And honestly, the people who work there, they need help, because it's really hard to work there in that building. And after being there a few times and volunteering there to help with some writing programs, I'm really amazed that we haven't heard this story months before now. So anyhow, so we're
Jessica,
working on
let me interrupt you, because now you're right in my wheelhouse. I can tell you, as a criminal defense attorney who goes from jail to jail, slightly anecdotal, but Northwest Correctional Facility and Chittenden Correctional Facility are appalling buildings. They're a disgrace. Vermont should be embarrassed by them. And I see them in many ways just as important as schools. Now, I'm biased, but I go to jails in New Hampshire and New York all the time, and there's no comparison. We need to put some money into that. And I'll stop there, because if you get me started, we'll be here all night. But I agree with you, and I can also tell you that what happens to women in Chittenden happens to women in Danbury and in all the other facilities that I've had clients go to.
And we went to Springfield this year too, and that was terrible. And I mean, that wasn't women, but it's really horrible. And I have a friend who's on the corrections committee, Representative Kurt Taylor, and I just spoke with him today because of our statement going out. And he just came back from Alaska, where he went to see the women's prison there. And he said it was amazing. And it is embarrassing what we are doing here compared to everywhere he's been. He went to Texas, and he thought it was better, the women's prison there. So, I mean, we have to do something. And the issue is so much bigger than what's in the paper today. I do feel good that Secretary Mike Smith immediately responded and said that he was going to work on this and put it as a top priority. So as a member of the Women's Caucus, I feel like we're slowly getting somewhere, and also as a member of the Lund Board, which is where I really started. So anyhow, those are, I mean, I have 5 pages of things I can tell you about. I've had a busy summer and fall. And happy to talk about any issue that you want to. We are going to start out with paid leave and minimum wage. Those are right off the bat. And then I believe the ban on the e-cigarettes will move pretty quickly, because the Senate has the same bill. Ginny and I are.
They may just end up going to a committee of conference,
Yeah.
where the difference will be hashed out between the members of the House and members of the Senate in a small committee.
It just occurred to me, I didn't read the article, but I saw the headline, I think it was this morning in Digger, where the speaker announced that the marijuana bill is not going to be her priority.
It's not her priority. It is a priority for the majority leader. So
Okay.
we're just watching.
Okay.
Yeah, we'll see.
We're members of the team, and we're watching to see what they work out.
Well, we wish you both every success in the session.
And thank you for coming.
Yeah, and
you.
as maybe a final question, could each of you tell us what would be, in your view now, the most meaningful accomplishment that you can report to us by the end of the session?
I think the vaping and e-cigarettes for sure will happen. I'm positive of that. We're going to have some real answers on how those children ended up so sick, and some of the young adults. And also, I'm positive we're going to ban flavors, which should make a big difference. I can tell you really quick, my worry about that is all the kids that are addicted. What are we doing to help them to deal with their nicotine addiction? Because we have not approved patches and things like that for kids. And so I'm working with the health department right now to try and figure that out, because I don't feel it's fair to say, oh, you can go to counseling. Well, you know, we didn't say that to adults. We need to figure out how to help these kids out. So that would be a big thing for me. And I think both of us would agree that paid leave will happen and minimum wage most likely will
They'll
happen.
probably get vetoed, so.
Yeah, we just, well, I don't think paid leave will.
I think education in the last 10 years has seen a lot of big initiatives. And right now, as chair, I'm not looking at big initiatives. I'm looking at calming the system down and doing a better job in what we already have and really stabilizing some of those changes.
Efficiencies and stabilization.
Stabilizing
That
as
makes some
opposed to
sense.
creating new
Yeah.
is really what I'm looking at right now. I don't get to do the fun stuff. What I need to do is the hard work of making sure that we're spending money wisely on the initiatives that we set forward that really have value.
Well, we thank you very much. All of us would agree that at any point that we can be helpful to you or provide experience or some thinking, we'd be happy to, and we won't hesitate to call on your help either. And you both track us pretty carefully and pretty routinely, so again, we can't thank you enough, and good luck. You know,
Thank you. I'm pretty in touch with the third floor. And Jessica's been so good at staying more in touch with the second floor, so
good.
Thank you.
Thanks
both.
much.
Good
Thanks for
coverage.
coming. We
Yeah,
appreciate
thank
it.
you.
and thank you.
Thanks.
Good to see you.
Yes, thank you for all the work you do every other Tuesday night. It's a lot of work, and it sounds like more than that tomorrow all day.
Yeah. We're gonna approximate your schedule tomorrow, yeah.
And I would say that we've got headed to the Northeast Kingdom, so.
Early, yeah.
Bright and early.
Good luck.
Bye,
Thanks.
thank you.
travels.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Is there any other discussion, any comment would anyone like to make? Hearing none, the next item is indeed what each of Kate and Jessica had initiated some discussion about, and that's a resolution being sponsored by the Vermont League of Cities and Towns regarding retail sale of marijuana. Do you want to introduce us to
Sure.
it?
So for those folks who don't know, there's an organization in Vermont called the Vermont League of Cities and Towns, and they are really our boots on the ground in Montpelier, if you will, helping us all be aware of what's happening in the legislature and helping us all to take a proactive approach to matters that are important to all Vermont towns and cities. The whole question of retail sale, tax and regulate of marijuana has been a hot button topic for the past several years. At least until today's article, the league felt strongly that there was likely to be a tax and regulate bill emerging from the legislature. And so they've been trying to figure out how to help towns, in a sense, stay ahead of the curve. Doesn't mean we will get what we want. But so they have proposed a resolution that the board has, and I think it's a helpful resolution. It tries to make sure that towns retain as much control as possible, given our love-hate relationship with local control in Montpelier, such that if the legislature were to adopt and pass legalized retail sales, this resolution would ask the legislature to make sure that towns can still keep all other aspects of municipal regulation in place, such as zoning, provides for a local sales tax that would be shared with municipalities. And as was referenced earlier, it recommends strongly a so-called opt-in option, which would mean that even if the legislature legalizes marijuana, if this resolution were adopted, it would require the towns actually have to vote to allow it within their borders, where the prior approach the state seemed to be pushing was opt-out, that if the state legalized it, it would be presumed legal everywhere unless towns voted not to. And of course, then it's a ping-pong match of who gets in first. Do entities get permits to do things, and then towns are behind the eight ball? The opt-in approach would give towns the ability to say, we want it or we don't, but it remains in local control. So the league is proposing that towns consider this resolution. I think it helps protect municipal interests in the event that the state does move forward. Adopting the resolution is, of course, advisory to the legislature. And so they've asked towns to consider it. There's no requirement that we do anything. But if we did, and if enough towns joined in, it would give our legislators and others some leverage in the State House.
It's a kind of a novel idea about sharing among all municipalities a portion of the revenue. You want to comment briefly on that?
Sure. So as I understand it, this resolution presumes there would be, I think, a 5% retail sales tax on marijuana, 2% of which would be shared with towns that don't wish to allow it, and the towns that do would keep 3%. So I think it speaks to that dynamic of us not being an island, that even if we want to allow something here, it might still affect those around us who might not be as
Yeah.
enthusiastic about it. So I think it's an approach to try to meet those needs.
Well, in theory, it would drive up our costs in some way, right? So if South Burlington had a booming marijuana sales and everybody was driving south, and so our police are pulling people over, it seems to me that spreading the,
Yep.
the benefit
Somewhat regionally.
should,
Yeah.
because
What about but also I can't quite, there's a regulatory function. Would that be the select board? How would that, and what would be the costs associated with something like that?
Well, there are many, many unknowns with this, and it's an interesting and paradoxical matter. And, I'm no prude, but it's an interesting concept that we want to educate people about the dangers of something, so we should legalize it to make money to educate about the dangers of it. It's kind of like saying, let's create a zone where it's legal to speed, but we'll still give you a ticket so we can teach people about how dangerous it is to speed. So it's a curious paradox.
And could the regulatory body be spread, say, across county municipalities or regions?
Regionalize it.
I
Could
think
it be regionalized under this?
I suppose anything is possible. The presumption to date has been that
Municipal
if this is
control.
passed, then towns that could choose to allow it might otherwise regulate it just as they do any other retail sales. So if we have commercial zones where retail is allowed, this might be allowed if the community voted for it. And if you had a residential district where retail wasn't permitted, well, this wouldn't override that, hopefully. That's part of the intent of
Right.
asking, to make sure other local controls still remain in place.
And did I understand the concern that they expressed was that something about, if a town voted for it, but the zoning disallowed, is that a conceivable? So that municipalities might zone in a way that would make it impossible effectively for sales? I wasn't quite sure what they were concerned about when they talked about 24 VSA 2291, a bylaw adopted to it. Is the intent to prevent municipality zoning bylaws and ordinances from banning marijuana? So is the thought there that towns might vote to approve, but the zoning regulations then might be established to prohibit effectively?
I'd have to look into that more. I'm not
Okay.
quite sure.
I was just kind of trying to understand sort of what they're envisioning.
I know that, we had talked some time back, Ludlow has long had an ordinance on the books about this, but, we looked into whether we should adopt that, and the advice I got, the legal advice was, if anybody challenged it, it's unenforceable because there wasn't any statutory
Authority, yeah.
provision to regulate it the way
Right.
that they chose to.
Right, we looked at that on the planning commission 4 or 5 years ago, and it just felt premature. And it may still be
And then we
somewhat
looked at it
premature
a year ago.
5 years later, so.
What was the effect, what was the article this morning? I missed
I
that.
didn't read it, I just
Oh.
saw the headline that the speaker said that the bill wasn't high
not
on her
front row.
agenda, yeah, at all,
Okay, and that's what Kate
But
was,
doesn't mean others might not
yeah.
still
yeah.
believe it to be a high
Yeah.
priority.
Where'd the 5% come from? Is that
Yeah, I wanted to
out
know
of
that.
thin air, or is it just kind of an approximation based on Colorado seems high at 10 and Oregon seems on the low end at 3? 5 felt.
Jessica, do you have any thought on where that?
The percent is very much in the air, because Ways and Means has to decide that, and Ways and Means has not spent any time on this yet, so we would
Understood.
just be guessing.
No, I know that.
But 3% is Maine, And that is, that 3% would go just to the localities that are allowing commercial.
Yep. Yeah, I get that. I think my question was,
In
where did
Massachusetts.
VLCT
Oh,
come up
where
with
did they
this
come up?
5% proposal for purposes of
It's
this
probably,
resolution?
it might be in the Senate version, because the
Okay.
House hasn't gotten to that yet. And on the zoning piece, I think what the league is getting at is that you can't pass a zoning regulation that is against the law of the state. So if the state says marijuana is legal and you have to, if you don't want it in your town, I mean, not legal, but it's a tax and regulate state, and it's an opt-out, we're under opt-out, which means that you can't say that you cannot have a commercial store here in Shelburne without opting out with a 2/3 vote of the people. So you can't pass the zoning rule, you can't change your zoning just so that you won't let it in
Right.
and not have to do a vote. Does that
Right.
make sense?
Yeah.
So you can't
that's
do an
what-
end run around.
Yes, you
Right.
can't do an end
Law
run, because we
through
have
zoning.
Dillon's rule in
Yes.
Vermont,
Right.
which means that everything gets decided
At the state
at
level?
the state.
All
Unless
power
you,
comes from you.
yeah, unless you if you have a charter, and then you could change your charter based on that. So, I think
Thanks, Jessica.
So my sense was the 5% felt a little low, but
Feels low to me, too.
it doesn't
Well, the
necessarily
particulars we're looking
lock us. I wonder, did it box us into anything? Probably not. It's still so fluid, and
Because they'd set the
I
rate
think it's more
anyway.
exactly, the
Yeah.
number is going to be the number that the legislature lands on. That was my only question about it, was
My sense is
percentage.
that we would be adopting this more so on the basis of mutual support and to fellow communities and towns. And since so much of it is premature in terms of detail,
Yep.
and that would seem a reasonable and useful step for us to take.
As a gesture of solidarity, you're saying?
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's a much
Yeah.
better way to put it.
Yeah. Well, yeah, and
Yes.
just clarifying.
I'm very much in favor of the opt-in.
Yes,
Approach.
I am too.
same here.
Yeah, I agree.
Did I hear a 2/3 vote
yeah,
If to opt out.
to
would be-
opt out? Or,
opt in.
and to opt in?
Right now,
If it stands the way it's,
House is
yeah.
an opt-in, which means that you are, in order to be in, which is have a store in Shelburne, you'd have to have a 2/3 vote
Okay.
that says you want to be a player in the marijuana world. Does that
Okay.
make sense? I'm
Yeah.
just trying to
Thank you.
simplify. To
Yeah.
opt out is you're in unless you get a 2/3 vote that says you want to be out.
And 2/3 of the voting population?
Well, that is a good question that I asked, and I didn't get a very
Okay.
an answer that made sense to me, so I'm not really
Okay.
positive about that. I think it would be your voting.
The standard
registers.
the last presidential election, some standard
Right,
like
your
Yeah,
that.
and you'd
voter
probably do
roll
a separate.
as
you
of a
might
certain
want-
date.
If you do separate, then you're gonna end up getting the people who know about it that come in and vote. I mean, it's really, it's an the whole thing is sort of odd to me. And I'll just let you know, I'm supportive of opt-in too. And I went to the committee and worked really hard to get it switched to an opt-in. A lot of students from CBU went and said they wanted opt-in, which I found really endearing. I mean, these were young kids who don't want it everywhere.
What was the principal argument against it?
Again, having opt-out?
Yeah,
I can tell you that because I asked that question a lot of
Yeah.
times.
would you,
The people who want opt-out, it is that they feel like it's not fair unless everyone is in, that we have passed it as a state and therefore everyone should be in. Except you can still have rules around, you don't want it close to a school and you don't, those sort of rules. But that if you don't do that, then every town could say they don't want to be in, and then you're not tax and regulating then because you're not giving the opportunity. So that was really
Very strong group of people who see this as a landmine for income.
Right, revenue.
I mean,
Yeah.
people are literally moving to Vermont to make this work and figuring out how to finance the operations because you can't use a federally insured deposit institution to do it.
No,
There's,
it's a cash business.
yeah, so,
And there's also the question of the difference between the commercial enterprise, so the store, and the farmer who wants to grow it. So that's the grow. And then there's the manufacturer who wants to turn it into the product, right? And so are you saying, this is the part that I couldn't get an answer on either. These are all things that are going to be important this year, is are we saying that we have to opt in for each one of the things? Because what if you have a farmer who comes and says, you know, I'm not making money on my farm and I'd like to take half of my land and do this, but now I have to have the whole town vote in, right? But I'm on the outskirts or what, I mean, think of Charlotte even, or, so I had a hard time. Nobody could really tell me, because in Massachusetts, that's very clear. It's very clear whether or not which you are.
It's very clear that when you opt in, you're opting into both, or you have to opt into
Everyone
one?
there is opt out. It's an opt out
Okay.
there. So it's if you want to opt out, you opt out on a specific kind of license.
I see.
Are you opting out on the commercial license? Are you opting out on the cultivating license, or are you opting out on the manufacturer license?
What's going to happen with the current legislation? Are people still going to be able to grow their own under this current?
Yeah, this has nothing to do with what we have in place already.
Right.
Yeah, the biggest thing is that people are starting, they believe that there's illicit selling of what they are growing. And
You
that's,
think?
yeah. I'm trying to be.
Charitable.
Be diplomatic.
Okay, anybody want to take the step?
I
Are we
would
looking for a
move that
proposal?
we have the chair sign the resolution as proposed by VLCT.
Mary moves that
Second.
we resolve. I don't think we need to read the entirety, but we might want to, and I ask your help, to read beginning with resolved, so the public's got a pretty good sense about what we're,
Sure.
would you?
Sure. Town of Shelburne, resolution supporting municipal authority in a commercial cannabis system. Resolved that the town only supports legislation, legalizing a taxed and regulated cannabis market that adequately addresses all aforementioned local considerations and concerns. 2, that the town supports a local cannabis tax of 5%, with 70% of the revenues derived from the local cannabis tax retained by the host community of a retail establishment, and 30% pooled and redistributed to municipalities that do not host retail establishments. And 3, that the town calls upon the state administration and legislature to provide communities adequate time and clarity in law for local officials and community members to discuss the local implications of such a market, and to update, clarify, and establish local regulations and policies accordingly.
Thank you, Lee. Any discussion? Hearing none, seeing no hands, those approving, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye, and those opposed, nay. The ayes have it. We thank you, and we thank you for that additional help, Jessica. Thank you, Lee, appreciate that.
Thanks.
The next item is a request for a waiver of penalty fee for late payment of property taxes.
This is a request by a homeowner seeking a waiver of his late fee, $212.69. As you know, we have a policy that you adopted some years back as to the criteria by which those requests would be judged. They speak in part to serious medical conditions that happened in recent times, unexpected financial loss or challenges of that sort. And then it does give the board some additional latitude for other so-called other extenuating circumstances. Person suggests he was ill that week when taxes were due and had some personal challenges there, and has been having trouble finding employment since moving from a neighboring state.
I'll give my reaction first. I do not think that this, the reasons offered by this taxpayer rise to the policy, and I do not think we should waive the fee. Mike?
I mean, I'm sort of in the same, I sort of agree with you. I was gonna ask Lee if he had a recommendation.
Well, and I'm not sure if Mr. Nathan is
Is he
here.
here or no?
No.
He
Okay.
was aware of the meeting tonight, but this one doesn't appear to meet the criteria in the way that several other requests over the past 6 or 8 months have, with all sympathy for the person, but
I guess I almost
It's
feel
tough.
like I don't have enough information. I'm inclined to grant it. It sounds like it does qualify as criteria 5, an unexpected financial loss. I just don't know if that 6-month period applies. That's my only question on it, so I'm struggling with, if he were here, he could articulate the timing of some of this, and then that fact would be helpful.
and it doesn't have to be decided tonight. Again, I did inform the gentleman that we'd be taking this up tonight. If the board wanted to table it to get more personal information, it's certainly your, there's no immediate urgency here.
I'm in favor of granting the request because so I could never be a judge, but I just, it's $212. He was sick. I think I would say that it falls into the illness criteria. And
I'm sorry, go ahead.
and he signed up for the automatic pay.
He did.
And, it's not gonna, I know it's, maybe it sets a bad precedent, but I do feel like it falls perhaps not squarely, but close enough into the exception. I guess, Mike, you had a comment on that? I thought it fell into the sickness exception, but,
Well, I just, having a fever on the day your taxes are due didn't strike me as falling into the sickness
agree.
objection.
4 days before the taxes.
Yeah, I agree with
that
that.
was it 4 days?
That's a long disability,
I mean, we've had some cases before us of sick individuals that were clearly,
Yeah, I know, we're
prevented
talking
from being able to
cancer,
pay.
but
To
yeah.
me,
Yeah.
it felt like criteria 5, a change in financial situation within 6 months prior to the due date.
yeah, that was.
Based on what he's conveyed here, it felt like that may qualify, not necessarily qualify
That was
to
the
me.
more
So
that was
if
the
there
more
is a
salient
provision
part of
that
yeah, that's fine.
request.
I could
I just-
support, it would be that, but I'm not,
I thought the burden sort of fell to him to show that.
Yeah, it would be nice if he were
I
here
think
tonight.
if he, right,
I-
typically in these situations, appearing can be more
Effective.
effective, and
It
he didn't
appears
show,
we're
again, he may be,
fairly evenly divided, and in any case, I think we'd benefit by some more information, as Jamie is detailing, as well as our other member.
I did just want to say that my reasoning was more along the lines of setting a bad precedent. We've been sort of trying to set a higher standard along these lines, and I just felt like if we're going to do that,
I
let's
don't
make sure we
disagree.
meet the
I do
standards.
have concerns about, all of a sudden, you start opening up a door to anybody who may be unemployed for some duration of time,
Sure.
who has a late payment, so I'm cognizant of that, which
We
is
hope
why it'd be
that-
nice if he were here to present it to us in real time. So I think we continue it
Okay.
until,
I'm
maybe
fine with
invite
that.
him back if he,
I'm fine with that.
okay.
We certainly, and meanwhile, we certainly hope the gentleman's health is better.
I think it is.
I think he's all better now, right?
Yeah, not,
We will
that
bring
kind
this
of
back.
fever is not happy. Okay? Next item is a proposed settlement in a property assessment valuation appeal, for which we've been provided the background. Does anyone have a comment on that?
I do. I don't know, of course, we all sit on the
Right.
Board of Civil Authority, but I was very involved in these hearings, and maybe you were too, Jamie.
Yeah, I went to several of these. It wasn't on the committee that did the inspection, but
Yeah,
certainly
yeah.
heard testimony from
Yeah, so
the
I feel
appellant, and I
weird.
don't know, I assume that that's happened before
Yeah, it must,
with these
from time to time.
scenarios, so there's probably no
So my
conflict
question
per
is
se.
it okay for us to vote on this
Right.
agreement when we were the deciders, we were the people that issued the decision that he appealed from?
I think we wear two hats, right? I think we,
Yep,
in this
Okay.
capacity, we're,
okay.
It sort of
Board
falls
members.
into
That's-
that,
That's the state agency role, right?
Right.
Yes.
So it's an intriguing construct, as you note. You were a prior appellate body, and yet at the same time, the only body that's authorized to approve changes to the grand list
Is this agency.
is you as the select
Yeah.
board, separate from your prior role on the Board of Civil
Yeah.
Authority. So it's a unique situation worth raising.
But it is an
But
interesting
there you
I'm
go.
not familiar enough with the statute to know, but from what I understand, now that they're a co-op, their actual dwelling unit gets appraised separately, and then the acreage just gets divided by the number of
Number of units.
units. That seems a little unfair if you happen to be, say, in
bigger
a
unit.
coroner lot that's really big,
Yeah.
and you got a fence all up, and you're the only person who's enjoying it. So I have a problem with the statute, but there's not much we can do about that.
Right.
What we're discussing is that as a select board, we are also members of the Board of Civil Authority, which has jurisdiction over questions of abatement of this kind. So we're raising a question about
Procedure.
a little, we're being quizzical about procedures given our duplicate or side-by-side role here. It's really not a duplicate role.
And Ted's not here, right?
No.
No, he's not. Fortunately, it's reduced to its essence of a de minimis change in the valuation that would save the town. The amount of taxes lost by reducing the value by $1,000 is roughly $20, and we'd spend that in a heartbeat pursuing this through legal channels. There were
Yeah,
two
that-
separate appeals, two separate properties. One was agreed to by the property owner to drop it. The other one would reduce the valuation from $39,200 to
Same owner. Right, for
$38,200.
both
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
So he agreed to
So
drop one
he
appeal.
agreed on the final assessment.
Right. He
This
agreed
is
on the
one that-
original
On
assessment.
the original assessment.
This is the only one that's before you potentially too. Sign off on.
What's the co-op position here? Are they okay with this?
My understanding is the co-op seeks clarity and simplicity. They were not,
Yeah.
the governing entity
Yeah.
was not thrilled with this challenge because they understood after we sat down and explained to them, we were bound by statute to make this change in the assessment. Short story for everyone. In the old days of the Lakeview Mobile Home Park, each mobile home was assessed as its own entity. The land was assessed separately and billed to the landowner. People paid that essentially through their rent, but Mr. Precor received the tax bill for the land. Once a mobile home park becomes a co-op where everybody shares ownership, by statute, we now need to divide up the land value, as Mary mentioned, by how many units there are. So if there's 60 homes, each home now gets an additional 1/60th of the land value. So their property assessment rises, but of course, it's now baked into their assessment where before they were paying it separately in rent. So one person challenged that underlying statutory requirement and didn't agree with the method of valuation, but we're bound by state law once something becomes a co-op.
So this would be agreeable to them, at least in terms of resolving the matter at the minimum?
That's my understanding.
Yeah.
And it doesn't set any precedents that we need
No,
to.
because it strictly relates to mobile home parks becoming co-ops. So Shelburne Wood went through this previously, now this entity did. The timing of it was based on when the grand list is lodged. If this had happened after April 1, this change wouldn't have taken effect another year out. Happened before April 1, so it took effect more immediately.
Are they just, I think, if I understand correctly, what they're doing is they're reducing the value of 132 Penny Lane, and that could be attributed to the mobile home itself, right?
Potentially.
So it doesn't, in my view, set a dangerous precedent.
It doesn't.
In my view, yeah, it does not.
So it also includes an exception in the event of a townwide reappraisal, is that right with that?
Right. it's-
Section 5, if there's a complete reevaluation of all taxable real estate, which
Right.
probably wouldn't happen in the next 2 years anyway.
Right,
So
So
it's
it
sort of locked
resets the
in for
value.
19, 20, and 21.
right.
Yeah.
And again, it's reducing it by $1,000. The net effect on taxes received roughly
$20
$20 a
per year.
And it resolves a dispute that would otherwise likely continue on through channels and incur legal bills.
Well, I would move to approve the change in value of 132 Penny Lane downward by $1,000
And approve the stipulation
and approve the
agreement as
stipulation. Yeah.
presented.
Mary so moves.
I'll
second.
I'll second that.
Mike seconds. Any further discussion? Hearing none. Those approving, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
And those opposed, nay. The ayes have it. Thank you.
Can I just make a point, that if there is a concern about whether we need to recuse because of sitting on the Board of Civil Authority, the new ethics ordinance does give the Ethics Committee advisory capacity. We could ask them what they thought.
I think we should, as just a housekeeping item, have someone ask Tom
We could do
what
that.
his thoughts
I mean,
are, just generally, since we talked about it as a board.
That's why I made the motion the way I did, was just to approve the change in value of the lot, because there's a statute that requires the
good for
legislative
you.
body to do that.
Well, good for you.
And then that would just sort of approve the stipulation through the back door, so to speak.
yeah. I mean, Ted, the assessor,
be a
certainly
lawyer.
knows the systems well, and I'm sure he would have been the first to suggest there was a conflict if he saw one, because he works with this system in multiple towns and has done so for many years. So, yeah, we could ask the committee, but, I mean, statute requires that you sit in these
Yeah,
multiple
yeah.
roles. I don't know where we go
Yeah,
with
but
it.
Well,
First
maybe
time
we
this has
just,
come up.
maybe we just send a note, you know, marking the discussion and calling some attention to it.
Ask Tom
And
Little, since he's also on the BCA.
Well, and this has come up. I do remember it did come up, and I can't remember what the discussion actually
yeah,
unfolded as.
and Tom may take it from there. He may
Yeah.
have some
I
ideas.
mean, I have no legal authority to approve
I
a
can
change
ask
in
Tom, I'd be
valuation.
happy to
Yeah.
send him
But,
an
yeah,
email.
we'll
why not?
follow up.
Yeah.
Or I'll do a little,
Ask
Yeah,
him.
I'll
And it has to be the case, otherwise it wouldn't work.
Yeah.
Right? Like, you don't know when something is going to be settled
Yeah,
and appealed, so when you're sitting on that board, you'd have to recuse every time,
yeah, that seems
right?
impractical.
Why have select board members sit on the BCA?
Yeah.
Yeah.
We could have a recusal roster.
I will need signatures after the meeting, if you please.
From everybody or just from Jerry?
Okay, thank you for indulging. We're talking about some cross currents here among boards and committees, and sometimes those connections themselves are interesting. But thank you. The next item is a high-level overview and context for the budget review process. We're noting that all day tomorrow, we will, as a select board, hear departmental and other town requests, budget requests. That will be the first time that we will be able to answer questions and discuss details, department by department, item by item. So this, tonight, I think Lee can speak and Peter more directly to it, but this is intended just as a kind of an introduction to what will be a very thorough day of it tomorrow. And we are, at this point, holding out the possibility that the select board will meet a week from tonight, largely, if not for the most part, entirely to deal with budget matters. And we will obviously keep everybody informed about whether that's going to occur later in the week.
Yeah, I think we'll know by end of tomorrow, and
Yeah.
I think it's likely. So as noted, this is intended as a simply very high-level overview, and as always, I am incredibly appreciative of Peter Frankenberg's heavy-duty lifting in the background, who is invaluable in this whole process. So just a quick recap of the overall process, and I apologize, I missed changing 2021 up here on the title. So earlier in the year, we took a brief look at the capital improvement plan, which are the big ticket items with a longer lifespan than the annual operating items. Took again another look in the late fall. Then we asked town department heads and committees to start preparing budgets for all of us. Tonight we begin, tomorrow spend all day, and we spend the next couple of weeks really reviewing this in great detail. In January, ultimately, we'll have further review and a formal public hearing on the proposed budget where it lands and the capital improvement plan, warn town meeting, March, of course, being the town meeting discussion and vote, and once adopted, the budget becomes effective on July 1. Very broad brush overview of where municipal resources, where revenues come from. 3/4 reliant on property taxes. We get a small amount of state highway aid. Recreation certainly derives a fair bit of revenue. They strive to have all of their programs cost neutral. Rescue Squad brings in funding, and as you may recall from prior years, they are kind of part of the town, but their finances are pretty much off budget. They are pretty much self-supporting. And then dispatch brings in revenue as well to help offset its expenses. And we dispatch for 35 agencies throughout this corner of the state.
Are they cost neutral then, Lee?
They are not. But remembering that, you know, their primary service is really
For
to
us.
our community. We also happen to derive revenue from outside agencies.
Thank you.
So just quick overview of some of the big ticket numbers in the proposed operating budget for next year. And this isn't casting judgment or criticizing these departments. It's just showing you where the highest numbers may come from. Police at $2 million, roughly 20% of the overall budget. We do run a 24/7 police department, and of course you'll hear a lot more about that tomorrow. Highway department's always a big ticket item in any community. And we know that our roads are well kept and well maintained, and those things do cost money. Debt service, somewhat higher this year. We know that's part of the nut we face this year. It's the first year we will face the full amount of the interest and the first year debt service on the principal for the library town center project. Fire department down slightly, but still, again, a big number. Remembering that if we had a paid career department, that number would be orders of magnitude larger than that. Library, fair amount to keep that running. Property and casualty and workers' comp insurance is always a big ticket item. We're always investigating, trying to learn more. Jerry had some conversations with Peter and our carrier, just trying to learn more about why our rates are where they are and what can we learn from that to try to lessen the incidence of claims.
Lee, do you mind if periodic interruptions?
Be my guest.
So
sure.
the fact that you have property and casualty insurance as a standalone item tells me that you can't allocate that cost to the various departments, whereas you don't have health insurance as a standalone item. So I assume that health insurance is allocated among the departments, because I know that's a big ticket item. We're looking at, for
It
Blue
is.
Cross Blue Shield, I thought you said it was 14%, and MVP not quite as high, but still higher than what we're paying now. Is that cost segregated out for the various departments? And I would ask the same question with respect to retirement.
It's a good question. Peter probably knows the answer to that. And it's always an interesting question from a budget perspective, because whether you allocate grand costs to individual departments or have it as a standalone item, it's the same number.
Right.
It may look different, and whether, different towns do it
Sure.
different ways. Same thing with electricity and phones and lights. Do you just say, look, it's a utility we need to pay, or does planning and zoning pay a percent in town manager's office?
Right.
And
Well, that's why I asked, because there are other items such as health insurance and
There
the
are.
pension that aren't.
And this wasn't
Standalone.
intended to be all-inclusive.
Okay.
So
But
which one is it?
it's a good question.
The employee benefits are allocated by department.
Mm-hmm.
Property casualty insurance, that's a little bit more difficult to allocate
'Cause it
by
runs with the
department,
building.
Because you're talking about the
Yeah.
insurance costs of this building.
Yeah.
Do you allocate it by offices? So that's one line item, whereas the benefits are assigned by departments.
Thanks.
So again, this isn't all the big ticket items, it's just a representative
It's only
sample.
10 million, right? 'Cause-
But in total, these plus all the other requests would come in at over $10 million.
Isn't our budget more along the lines of 19 million?
No, this
17?
is all of these plus all the other requests
Gotcha.
made to date none have been vetted at this time.
I'll shut up until you're done.
No, it's okay. Happy to have an
We're gonna
interactive
warm up for
conversation here.
tomorrow.
Well, at this rate, we'll still be here. Sorry.
So just a few of the key items we'll be discussing and facing. One is hopefully adopting the stormwater utility and integrating that into the budget. The advantage of that system is adding fees in that are not built into just limited to the property owners. So yes, at the end of the day, it's out of all of our pockets, but we're trying to phase in that system, and we'll have more conversation about how that would work. Again, property casualty workers' comp insurance, that's going up. Health insurance is going up, although we are taking substantial steps to try to mitigate the impact of that. Rough calculations would be if we stayed with Blue Cross Blue Shield, that could cost the town an additional $115,000 next year. Switching to MVP saves roughly $100,000. And that's the plan we are proceeding on at this point, is to make that switch. We've been working with all of our staff to help explain that system and why we're making that change. And for the most part, people seem to get it, that we're trying to hold people whole on coverage, but we need to take dramatic steps. We've talked to other municipalities, other entities that use MVP, and nobody's yet said it was
Is that
a
something
problem.
we need to vote on as a board, or is that something you do on your own?
Well, we're launching that program, presuming you would want us to save that kind of
Yeah,
money.
right, yeah.
The other option, of course, would be pretty dramatic cost sharing by employees that would probably be unaffordable for many.
I
So-
was just curious about the process. Is that the process? It comes to us at some point?
Well, I'm hoping you'll,
That's a management decision,
yeah,
you know, that
But it's
we,
ultimately reflected in the overall budget.
right.
which we,
Those savings will be
yeah,
right.
identified, but the
So,
numbers.
sorry, I mean, I'm still sort of figuring this out. At some point, do we vote on the budget as a board that we're gonna propose to the
Yes.
town?
Yes.
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 Okay,
So,
Which the town manager proposes,
okay.
but we have the approval, we have the final approval.
And
as
that's,
it's
is that
presented.
the January date?
so, good question. So, in brief summary, tonight's very high-level
Yeah.
intro.
And
Tomorrow,
go
all
through
the
nuts and
departments and the committees will come in, make their pitch to you. There will be no decisions made
bolts.
tomorrow.
Right.
We'll all take it all in, discuss it over one or several meetings, ultimately based on guidance and directives that you give me as a board. Then I have to try to fashion a budget that meets your directives and balances the competing needs and interests.
Peter, they sharpen their pencils.
Yes.
And then we
Sure.
have opportunities, Mike, in January, up to a deadline point in our meetings. So there's public, opportunities for the public to input as well, to discuss that working or final draft.
And the goal is to keep the tax rate increase down as low as
Right,
possible.
that part
That's
I get.
obvious, sorry.
But ultimately, you as a board will vote on a budget that we
What's
together
the
vote
date for that?
vote to warn for town meeting. So typically in early January, I would give you what I feel is the best final draft I can. Mid-January, ultimately, the board puts its stamp of approval and says, this is the budget we're gonna warn for town meeting.
Okay, good.
So it's a
Usually by
multi-step
the last
process.
week in January, you want to have
Yeah.
the warning signed.
Yep.
Okay.
And again, we're getting lots of requests and pressures, as you might imagine. Different committees and boards and citizens groups want a variety of improvements. Again, I cast no judgment in making that statement, but ultimately we'll be trying to figure out how and whether those all fit in to the budget. Again, debt service, first year of combined principal and interest on the full bond for the library town center, so that's a several % increase all by itself. Capital projects, we're always have more capital projects than we can reasonably afford to do over time, and we try to use the capital budget in a way to, again, just like the operating budget, try to address needs while maintaining a reasonably stable tax rate. So we try not to hit the community with multiple big-ticket items all in the same year. We will also face negotiating in the early part of the year. The police union contract expires in June, so we'll need to initiate that negotiation, and that presents a certain level of uncertainty about
Is
where
that a
that
1 year?
lands.
How long? How many
Those are
years?
3-year contracts typically. So last year, we negotiated the other union, which covers water, wastewater, and buildings and grounds.
Yeah.
Barely had I landed here interim, and Jerry and I were launching that process. We got through that very successfully. I'm hopeful we can have a collaborative approach with the police union. So this is just a quick overview of debt payments, and the high point, as you can see, being next year. Again, it's the first full year of debt and principal on the bond. So things start to drop off a bit after that. The bond on this building will be retired in several years out, but there's always something right behind it to take its place.
Right,
But
that's just the library bond?
this is,
No, it's,
No,
I can
this is-
see, I see.
That's
Oh.
the high point is
I see
every,
down there, I see, I got it, yeah.
And the peak's reflected in this budget, correct?
yes, it is.
Yeah.
So just again, some highlights of where the committee requests are coming from. The Village Safety Committee has a number of requests it hopes to see happen next year. We have the Irish Hill Path Project that's 80% funded by state and feds, but 20% by the town, so that's baked into it, and the committee has another request as well.
I thought we approved that path
We did,
last year.
but it's now a fixed part of the budget that we have to know about, that we
Oh,
know
I see,
about.
I see.
So it's not really a request, but we're just saying it's
It's in there.
it's in there.
Now we have to pay for it.
Yeah.
I
have
thought
to
it was
pay
in
for
there though for 20.
Well, it's a several-year project.
Okay,
But when you work through state and federal funded projects, they bring along with them many complications for various studies that have to be done, the engineering design you'd have to do anyway, right-of-way acquisition. It's not
Gotcha.
just building a path up the side of the road. I wish it were that simple, believe me. Open Space Fund is a perennial request. Beach House, trying to figure out whether we fund that or push that out. Tree Committee has some new requests for next year. We all know that the emerald ash borer presents its own set of challenges and potential expenses. And then Social Services Committee, which I think has served us very well, but they certainly have their requests as well. And then we have some unknowns out there, like the prospective fire rescue project. As you know, the land analyses and studies are underway. There's an intent to try to work through permitting, but we won't know where that lands in time for this budget, most likely. But it's a big ticket item floating out there that we can hardly ignore. So quick next steps, here we are, December 10 tonight, tomorrow the all-day budget review. I'm presuming likely next week we'll need to meet and discuss that further and consider warning a public hearing at some point into January. Given the lead times for those, we'll need to pick the date. It doesn't mean we know what the budget will be yet for that hearing, but we probably should pick that date and just agree to have that warned when it's needed. January 7 would be a meeting where I would present the budget. I know there's been a lot of discussion that December 31 is the deadline, and apparently that was kind of an informal matter between the chair and the manager in the past administration. Legally, under the charter, I need to deliver you a budget at least 45 days before town meeting. So January 7 is 48 or 50 days before. But if I get it to you before the end of the year, I'll consider that a success on my end.
And a gift of way uncertain value and worth and impossibility.
Thank you.
so,
No pressure.
can I ask, Lee, the schedule you have up there, normally, if I understand correctly, normally our select board meetings for January would be the 14th and the 28th, but have you moved it up to the 21st to meet deadlines?
I think that's how we did it last year in order to meet the legal requirements before town meeting.
Yep, because you have to have your budget done X amount of days
Yeah, the
prior.
warrant falls within that third week pretty regularly.
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay, just FYI, I'll have to participate in both those meetings by phone, but I'm happy to do so.
Thanks. Yeah, I know, you're right, it is a change, and I'm glad you pointed that out.
Is the 7th a select board meeting?
Typically, that would be,
Yeah.
yes.
So it would be
That would be the
3 weeks.
final heavy lifting before solidifying a budget that you can support and feel reasonable about presenting to the taxpayers. So otherwise, tomorrow morning, 9 a.m., we'll have some refreshments here at that time, and of course, provide for lunch midday.
All right.
I'd love to have a paper, sorry,
Oh, sorry, go ahead, Mary.
I'd love to have a paper copy of what you just presented, just to
Yep.
have in my,
I will have that for you
okay,
tomorrow.
we don't
morning.
have it in here, okay.
Not yet,
All right.
but I will have
All
it
right,
for you
thank
tomorrow
you.
morning.
That'd be really helpful.
And
for
the
him to-
notebooks you have are for tomorrow, and they are keyed by tab,
Yep,
as you'll see in
they
the
look
first
very
page.
helpful.
Because last year, it seemed like we had some challenges. It was all kind of stacked together. I wanted to try to make it easier to keep track of where we were
Thank
with
you.
each department.
Could we also have copies of the capital improvement plan
Well, that'd be
Yes, I
great.
for us
believe
tomorrow? I
they're,
don't see them in here.
if they're
but
not
maybe I
in
just
there,
flipped
we
through.
will have those
Okay.
for you. I think they may be just behind the first two schedule pages. If it's not, I'll make sure you have it.
It may be, I was flipping through it quickly,
Yeah.
so.
These are, it's worth mentioning,
here.
these are
No, it's
public meetings, and they're not televised tomorrow, but these are public sessions. They are on the order of working sessions entirely, and it's a,
You see
I
it
think
there?
Lee's done an outstanding job in organizing it. This is an innovation we took 2 years ago, where the practice until that point had been separate presentations on different occasions. And the rationale was if we hear all of the requests at one time, it's easier to stay away from silos. It's easier to remember somebody at 11:30 said something about, now we're hearing at 2 o'clock, and you start making many more connections and the town operation is all interconnected, and you avoid a lot of this one budget, one activity, moving on to the next. So I think it has a hidden value in presenting all of what the town is doing in a fairly concentrated period of time with numbers, to boot. So that's what it's all about.
Yeah, It makes for a long day, but a
Yeah.
number of towns have moved to this approach for
Yeah.
the very reasons you state.
And it really, I think it functions as a much more effective preliminary review of numbers. Plus, you get an opportunity to ask questions which may not have taken a form of a number at that point, but you learn something about department head takes on what they see coming, or specifically why they wanted a particular matter versus another. So it's a very valuable period of time.
Yeah. And along those lines, you'll see that certain, even separate entities are grouped together, both in time and in your tab, because I thought it important for us, for example, to hear from the Paths Committee, the Village Safety Committee, and Natural Resources together, because ultimately, I think they're more integrated than they may see themselves as, but we need to look at it as
A whole, yeah.
that whole. So if somebody wants a
Yeah.
path here and a crosswalk here and a path here, well, let's think about it as an integrated whole and not as these
Yeah.
entirely discrete items.
In the past, we've had departments look through a +3, flat, -3 lens. Did we not take that approach, or how are we thinking about?
I did not ask department heads to do that this year,
Okay, I mean, we can ask in real time tomorrow. It's
but I think I've made it clear to department heads that they will likely be asked for, probably won't be too many requests for increasing things from this board, but that they may well be asked to consider, if they're asking for an increase, where can they net out as a decrease?
Yeah.
And that's based on conversations that Chair and I had.
I would certainly expect that one of the questions of any department head or any proposer is going to be, what would you drop to net out your budget at last year's amount? So I think the expectation is a flat budget.
It'll be a day tomorrow.
I'd love to know, is it too early to ask either you, Lee, or Peter, what each of you thinks we are conservatively looking at for tax increase? I know we had that discussion a couple meetings ago, and it was bare bones budget, we were still looking at a 5%, I think.
I think based on
I don't see it here.
it was roughly, round figures, roughly a 4% out of the gate based just on fixed known costs that are unavoidable. And that's part of the
What
challenge.
was it last year? 5?
We landed, your goal was,
We went from 4.8 to 5.1 with the
Right.
last minute.
Add of the,
But we had about a 2.9 nut. This year we've got a 4.
almost a 4.
And I think the thinking is, we have a 4% ground-in increase right now, which assumes a flat grand list and some other things. And rather than feel some almost artificial constraint by saying, let's keep it below 5, which would allow $18.20 to play with, kind of, that I shouldn't make a joke of it, but rather than do that, I think the thinking was, the expectation is that we are at 4 already, that it's a reasonable expectation that we're not going to exceed 6, but where we end up at 5.1 or 5.2 or something still remains to be seen. My sense is, my personal sense is that Lee and Peter well understand and wouldn't benefit by any particular number at this point. We're so pressured by what we know are going to be, for all practical purposes, nearly 5% increase just sitting here. So in that case, I think it's in the doing now. We find out how hard, how hard is it going to be to keep it at that? Yeah.
Agreed, sorry to interrupt.
Yeah.
Do we have a line item budget?
Not yet. We
Okay,
thought it would be,
because
just
we
in
have in
terms
the
of-
past.
in process, we thought we'd hear from the department heads. Peter and I would then work, I mean, I give credit to Peter, but that we weren't quite ready to prepare that whole full-blown line item budget
Okay.
yet.
But we'll have the draft I assume we will meet the 17th, but we would have a working draft, and
That would
at
be
that point,
helpful.
we'd have a
Yes.
working number, with an outcome
Yes.
that reflected anything really extraordinary out of Thursday. So we have a pretty basic idea where we've ended up.
Yeah, I guess it would be helpful to have this year's budget as well,
For side by side.
the line item
Maybe we can do
budget.
that on the 17th after we have all of our presentations tomorrow. That makes sense?
Yeah,
Surely, the sooner we get it, the better, as
Yeah,
far
I
as following the
understood.
I think
bouncing
that's
ball, but
I think that's a fully expected outcome. By the time we've gone through everything tomorrow, Lee and Peter will have enough understanding of where we thought increases or decreases made some sense, and otherwise, how we feel about some assumptions they've made. For instance, the change from Blue Cross to MVP, and we'll have an intelligent sense of where we seem to be, and then we could expect Peter and Lee to let us know the following Tuesday with a number about where are we really. I wouldn't want us to continue beyond the 17th without a sense of, are we looking at 4.9 or 5.2 or something like
Right.
that?
Yeah.
What's our remaining amount that we think would be acceptable and that we can then think about and discuss over the next 3 weeks,
Yeah, we'll get that to you as soon as we can after
Yeah.
tomorrow.
It's going to be a tough year. I think everybody understands that. And you can see from the chart, that's one of the drivers, and
Yep.
so
Thank you.
Thank you,
we'll be there with sharpened pencils.
indeed.
I move to adjourn until 9 o'clock tomorrow.
I second that, except for I second all
Get a
that.
12-hour break.
Any further discussion? Hearing none, is there a motion to
Pending,
adjourn?
yes.
Yes.
Mary made a motion,
I second it.
and Mike seconded. Any discussion of that? Obviously not. Those approving, please signify by saying aye. Aye. And those opposed, nay. The
You have to
ayes have
sign
it.
that
Thank you.
resolution.